He thought he understood the foundation his marriage was built on. He was a structural engineer, a man who spent his career calculating exactly how much weight a structure could bear before it failed. He had never once applied that knowledge to his own life. Jerome's wife, Adrienne, told him she was spending the weekend in Miami with her girlfriends. She showed him the group chat. She kissed him goodbye. What she didn't know was that Jerome had already found her location pinned to a private Airbnb, listed as a romantic retreat, sleeping too. She didn't know he was already on a flight. She didn't know he was standing 8 feet behind her on an open Miami sidewalk when she closed her eyes and laughed into another man's chest. And when she opened them and found her husband already there, still close and watching, Jerome Whitfield made a decision that would dismantle everything Adrienne thought she had secured. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The sun wasn't fully up yet, but Jerome Whitfield was already on site. He moved through the half-built structure the way he always did, steady, unhurried, his eyes reading the skeleton of the building the way other men read a newspaper. Steel beams, concrete columns, the careful logic of load and support. He stopped at a junction where 2 crossbeams met and crouched down, running 2 fingers along the weld seam. Ramirez, he didn't raise his voice. A younger man in an orange vest appeared at his shoulder almost instantly. Sir, this joint, you see the gap on the eastern edge? Ramirez leaned in. A beat. Then, yes, sir, I see it. Get it re-inspected before we pour anything on this level. Nothing moves forward until that's signed off. Yes, sir. Jerome stood, tucked his blueprints under his arm, and kept walking. Behind him, Ramirez was already on his radio. That was how it always went. Jerome didn't need to explain himself twice. He didn't need to be loud. People understood, almost instinctively, that when Jerome Whitfield identified a problem, the problem was real. He spent another 40 minutes walking the site, noting 3 more items in his small black notebook. A drainage angle that needed adjustment, a section of framing that was 2 degrees off plumb, a material delivery that hadn't been logged correctly. Small things. But Jerome had learned long ago that small things were where structures failed. Not in the dramatic, obvious places, in the quiet ones, in the gaps nobody thought to check. He was in the parking lot, pulling off his hard hat, when his phone buzzed with a text from Adrienne. Picking up a few things before I pack tonight. Don't wait on dinner. He read it once. He typed back. Okay. He drove home. She was in their bedroom when he arrived, a soft-sided suitcase open on the bed, folded clothes arranged in neat stacks. She had music playing, something light and summery, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway with the kind of bright, easy smile that used to be the first thing he noticed about her. Hey, baby. She held up a sundress and tilted her head at it, considering. Too much? Depends where you're going. Miami. She laughed softly and draped the dress over the suitcase. I told you about this weeks ago. You never listen. She said it warmly, without any real edge. The girls haven't done a trip since before COVID. Maya, Tricia, and Danielle, we've been planning this forever. Jerome leaned against the door frame. What hotel? We're doing an Airbnb. More space, more fun. She was moving around the room now, efficient and light on her feet, pulling things from the closet, from the top drawer of her dresser. I'll send you the address. What's the address? She paused just a half second. Then she waved her hand like the answer was somewhere in her phone. I'll text it to you. She picked up her phone from the nightstand and held it out toward him. The screen angled slightly. A group chat visible. Names and a few emojis, but tilted just enough that he would have needed to lean in and take the phone from her hand to read it clearly. See? The whole crew. Maya won't stop sending memes about what drinks to pack. Jerome looked at the screen, then at his wife. Sounds fun, he said. He walked to her. He kissed her cheek. Her skin was warm, and she smelled of something new. A perfume he didn't recognize, something expensive and not quite hers. She squeezed his arm briefly as he pulled back, and she was already turning back toward the suitcase before his hand left her shoulder. He went downstairs and made himself a plate from the leftovers in the refrigerator. The house was quiet after her car backed out of the driveway. Jerome sat at the kitchen table. He didn't turn on the television. He didn't open his phone. He just sat with both hands wrapped around a glass of water and looked at the refrigerator and let the silence be what it was. 6 weeks. That was how long the feeling had been living in him, quiet and patient, the way a structural problem lives in a wall long before anyone sees the crack. 6 weeks ago, he had come home early from a site visit, a supplier issue that resolved itself by noon. He had let himself in through the side door, the one that didn't make noise, and he'd heard Adrienne in the living room, her voice low and different. Not whispering, just careful. The kind of careful a person uses when they want to be heard by one person only. By the time his key had touched the lock, the call was over. She'd been on the couch with a book when he walked in. No phone in sight. He had noted it. He had said nothing. Since then, 2 late evenings she attributed to client events, a warmth in her manner toward him that felt performed rather than felt, and a new habit of taking her phone into the bathroom. He set down the glass. He opened his laptop. Their shared cloud storage had been set up years ago during tax season, a joint folder for receipts, documents, shared files. Neither of them used it for much anymore. But there was one feature they'd turned on during a road trip 3 years back, a location-sharing setting for safety. He'd never turned it off. He had simply assumed she had. He clicked the folder. He found the setting. The pin was live. It dropped on a location in Miami. He opened the map and stared at the address. Wynwood, a residential building on a narrow street lined with bougainvillea. He searched the address in a new tab. The listing came up immediately. A private Airbnb, interior photos of a king bed and a candlelit balcony, sleeping capacity listed as 2, the description using the words intimate and retreat 3 times in 4 sentences. Jerome looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he opened a new tab and typed, "Flights to Miami tomorrow morning." The gate was half empty at 5:47 in the morning. Jerome sat in a hard plastic chair near the window, carry-on at his feet, and watched the ground crew move below in the blue pre-dawn dark. He had slept maybe 2 hours. It didn't matter. He wasn't tired in the way that sleep fixed. He picked up his phone and called Uncle Darius. It rang twice. "You know what time it is?" Darius's voice was rough with sleep, but not surprised. Men who spent 40 years in city contracts work learned early that calls before 6 in the morning were never about nothing. "I need you to run a property check for me," Jerome said. "Wynwood, Miami. I'll text you the address." A pause. The sound of Darius shifting, sitting up. "Property check. Who owns the unit? Who's listed on the rental registration? Anything connected to the address." Another pause. Longer this time. "Is this about Adrienne?" Jerome looked out at the tarmac. A luggage cart moved slowly beneath the yellow lights. He didn't answer. Darius breathed once. "I'll make some calls." "Thank you." He hung up. He sent the address. Then he sat with his phone face down on his knee and waited for them to call his row. Miami hit him the moment he stepped outside the terminal. Thick heat, even in the afternoon, the kind that pressed against your skin and made the air feel substantial. He picked up the rental car without incident, a gray sedan, plain and forgettable, and pulled out of the lot heading south. He knew the city well enough. He'd been twice for work, once for a conference on coastal infrastructure. He remembered the traffic, the flat brightness of it, the way the neighborhoods changed block by block from glass towers to painted murals to quiet residential streets lined with old trees. Wynwood looked different from the Airbnb photos. Warmer, more human. He turned onto the street and drove past the building once. Stucco exterior, the color of pale sand. Bougainvillea climbing a wrought iron fence in tangled bursts of deep pink. A narrow walkway leading to a heavy wooden front door. The kind of building that looked like someone had chosen it carefully for exactly what it was. He drove around the block and parked. He gave himself no instructions. He didn't need them. He got out of the car, walked to the corner, and found a position on the sidewalk with a clean sightline to the front door. Not hiding. Not tucked into a doorway. Just a man standing on a public sidewalk in a city where nobody looked twice at anything. He wore a plain dark shirt and dark pants, and nothing about him announced itself. He waited. The neighborhood moved around him. A woman walked a small dog past his feet. Somewhere down the block, someone was cooking. Garlic and oil, and something sweet underneath it. The bougainvillea rustled against the fence in a warm, slow wind. The light changed as the sun dropped, going from hard white to the soft amber of early evening. The kind of light that makes everything look a little more beautiful than it is. Jerome stood still, patient, unhurried. He had stood on job sites in July heat for 6 hours waiting for inspectors. He had sat through meetings where men with half his knowledge argued twice as loud for 3 times as long. Waiting was not a hardship. Waiting was simply the part before the work. At 7:42, the front door opened. Adrienne stepped out first. She was wearing a red dress, something fitted and simple that Jerome had never seen before. Her hair was down. She was laughing at something before she'd even cleared the threshold. Her head tilted back slightly, the laugh loose and unguarded. And Jerome saw it immediately, in his chest before his mind caught up to it. She looked happy. Not performed happy. Not the bright social smile she wore to work events and dinner parties. Genuinely, completely happy, in a way that was both beautiful and devastating to look at. Behind her, the man followed, tall, broad through the shoulders, a linen blazer, cream-colored, the kind of thing that cost more than it looked, silver at his temples, a face that was used to looking at things and having them go the way he wanted. He moved like a man who had never once been told no and expected that to continue. He put his hand on Adrienne's waist and turned her toward him, not asking, just deciding, and pulled her in slowly, completely. An embrace that wasn't hello or goodbye, but possession. The embrace of a man who had already decided something belonged to him. He lowered his head and said something into her ear. Low, private. Adrienne's eyes closed. She made a soft sound, something between a laugh and a sigh, and she turned her face into his chest, the way a person turns toward warmth. Her shoulders dropped. She was completely at rest. Jerome was standing 8 feet behind them on the open sidewalk. He had not moved, had not made a sound. Adrienne opened her eyes. She found him immediately. Not after a moment of searching. Immediately. The way you find a thing that was always there. And the happiness left her face all at once, completely, like a light going out at the source. No stages, no delay. Just gone. Grant felt her body go rigid in his arms. He turned. Jerome was already there. Still. 7 feet of open concrete between them. No buffer. No distance. Just the warm Miami evening pressing in from all sides, and Jerome's eyes, and the quiet that was worse than anything he could have said. Jerome looked at Grant first. Not long. Maybe 4 seconds. But the kind of 4 seconds that have weight to them. The kind that don't rush and don't apologize. He took in the linen blazer, the silver temples, the hand that had just been on his wife's waist. He looked at the man the way he looked at a structural report when he already knew where the failure was. Steady, complete. Then he turned to Adrienne. Only Adrienne. You said you were with the girls. That was all. 3 words. Quiet as a door closing. They landed in the warm evening air and just sat there. And the silence after them was worse than any volume could have been. Adrienne's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then something did. The machinery of her, clicking into motion, running the only programs it knew. Jerome. Her voice was careful, soft. Jerome, I can explain. You followed me? The softness hardened fast. Her chin lifted a degree. You actually followed me here? That's… Jerome, do you understand how that looks? He didn't answer. He didn't move. She pressed on, her voice finding its footing the way it always did, smoothing, pivoting, turning the conversation until she was no longer the one standing in it wrong. I was going to tell you. This isn't what you think it… Adrienne, just her name, said the same way he'd said everything else. Quiet, level, no heat in it at all. She stopped. Grant cleared his throat. He'd taken a half step to the side. Not obvious, but Jerome had clocked it the moment it happened. A man creating distance, subtle and reflexive, the way men like him moved when exposure arrived. Jerome noted it and filed it and said nothing about it. I think, Grant said, his voice measured, practiced, the voice of a man accustomed to rooms that needed managing. We should all just take a moment here. This is clearly… Jerome turned and looked at him, full, unhurried, the same way he'd looked at him before. Not with anger, not with anything that gave Grant something to push against. Just a look that lasted long enough to make the other man run out of things to do with his hands. Grant's sentence trailed off somewhere in the middle of it and didn't come back. Jerome looked at Adrienne. I'm not going to make a scene in the street. His voice was even, almost gentle in its steadiness. That's not who I am, and you know it. She was watching him the way people watch something they don't have a category for. Her eyes were wet, but she hadn't cried. Not yet. When your weekend is finished, Jerome said, come home. We have things to discuss. A beat. I've already spoken to an attorney. He watched her face. He watched it the way he watched a load-bearing wall when the calculations didn't add up. Carefully, without looking away. And he saw the collapse happen behind her eyes before it reached the rest of her. The composure she'd built so fast, so expertly, just gave. Her lips pressed together, and her jaw worked, and her eyes went somewhere that wasn't the street, wasn't Miami, wasn't anywhere close to here. She didn't say anything. Jerome nodded once, not at her, not at Grant, just the small, private nod of a man confirming something to himself. He turned and walked, back around the corner, back down the block, back to the gray sedan sitting unremarkable at the curb where he'd left it. He got in. He adjusted the mirror. He pulled out of the space and drove toward the hotel without rushing, without running any lights, without any of the urgency that had no use for him right now. The hotel room was clean and quiet, and completely without personality, the way hotel rooms are, cream walls, a desk he wouldn't use, curtains that blocked the light from the parking lot. Jerome set his key card on the dresser. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He didn't turn on the television. He sat in the dark with his hands loosely clasped between his knees, and he let the room be quiet around him. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't move to the window. He just sat and breathed, and let himself feel the full weight of what the evening had shown him, not flinching from it, not rushing past it, the way a man who works with real things learns to stand inside the reality of what's broken before he decides how to fix it. 1 hour. Then he picked up his phone. It rang once. Talk to me, Darius said. Jerome stared at the wall. The blank, cream-colored wall that told him nothing and asked nothing, and simply waited. It's confirmed, he said. His voice was level, completely level. Now I need everything. The flight home was 2 hours and 20 minutes. Jerome spent most of it looking out the window at nothing, just flat white cloud cover, the kind that looks solid from above and disappears the moment you fall through it. He had a coffee he didn't finish. He had a window seat he'd specifically chosen so no one would sit next to him and expect conversation. He wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. He was still reading the report. Adrian's car was in the driveway when he pulled up. He sat in the rental for a moment before getting out. Just a moment. Then he grabbed his carry-on from the back seat and went inside. She was in the living room. She'd changed into something simple. No makeup, hair pulled back, the deliberate costuming of a woman who understood that this particular performance required a different wardrobe. Her eyes were red at the edges. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked up when he came through the door, and her face did something complicated. Jerome. Her voice broke on the first syllable. Perfectly timed. I'm so glad you're home. He set his bag down near the door. He came in and sat in the armchair across from her, not beside her on the couch, not close enough for contact. And he looked at her and waited. She talked for a long time. It started 3 months ago, she said. Just a professional relationship that got complicated. She was confused. She wasn't thinking clearly. She'd never meant to hurt him. She loved him. She'd always loved him. She still loved him. And she knew that probably didn't mean much right now, but she needed him to know it. Jerome listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct her. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on her face, and he listened the way he listened to everything, completely, and without letting her see what he was doing with what she said. When she was finished, the room was quiet for a moment. I need time to process, he said. That was all. She nodded. She wiped her eyes. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it briefly before standing and moving to the kitchen to get a glass of water. From the kitchen, he could hear her exhale, long and slow, the exhale of a woman who believed the worst part was behind her. He drank the water and looked out the window above the sink. He gave her that. He gave her the feeling of control. The way you give a building a controlled demolition sequence, everything looks intact until the moment the charges go off. Darius called 3 days later. Jerome took it in his car, parked in the lot outside his office building, doors closed, engine off. Grant Holloway, Darius said. He had the flat, unhurried delivery of a man who had spent 40 years learning not to editorialize. Holloway Capital Group. He's been running payments through Adrian's business, event contracts, 14 months. Jerome said nothing. 43 transfers, Darius continued. I had a contact pull the business account records. Total is north of 200,000. Now, some of that's real. She coordinated a couple of his corporate events, those check out, but several of the transfers, he paused. There's nothing on her booking calendar. No vendors, no venue deposits, no staffing, nothing. Jerome? The money moved, but the events didn't happen. Jerome kept his eyes on the windshield. There's more, Darius said. I got into some of Holloway's email correspondence through a mutual contact. Early on, second month of the arrangement, he references you by name. Your name, your profession. He knew you were the husband. He knew exactly what he was stepping into. Jerome breathed out slowly through his nose. He chose it, Darius said. That's what I'm telling you. This wasn't a man who got in over his head. This was a man who made a calculation. Send me everything, Jerome said. Already moving. Camille came over on a Tuesday evening while Adrian was out. A dinner with a client she'd mentioned that morning, with the easy, practiced casualness Adrian used when she was going somewhere she didn't want examined. Jerome had nodded and said nothing and texted Camille the moment her car left the street. She arrived with a legal pad and her laptop, and she sat at the kitchen table and went through everything Darius had sent. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She didn't offer commentary while she worked. She simply read, her eyes moving across the pages in the quick, systematic way of a woman who had spent years learning to see what numbers were actually saying beneath what they appeared to say. Jerome made coffee. He set a cup beside her. He stood at the counter and waited. It took her 40 minutes. Then she set down the page she was holding, took her reading glasses off, and looked up at him. She was positioning herself to leave you, Jerome. Her voice was quiet, steady. The voice of someone delivering a truth they wish they didn't have to carry. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake that got out of hand. She pressed her hand flat against the stack of documents. This was the financial exit. Jerome stood at the counter. He didn't move. He didn't look away from her. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. "What would it take," he said, "to document it properly?" Camille told him. He nodded once. "Then let's do it." Jerome called attorney Diane Frost at 7:53 in the morning, before Adrienne was awake. He stood in the driveway in yesterday's clothes, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. The neighborhood was still quiet, just the sound of a sprinkler 2 houses down, and the early birds doing their work in the oak tree by the mailbox. Frost's assistant answered on the 3rd ring. Jerome gave his name, said it was regarding a high-asset divorce matter, and asked for the earliest available appointment. He was offered Thursday at noon. He took it. He went back inside and made breakfast. Adrienne came downstairs 20 minutes later. She kissed him on the cheek. He handed her a cup of coffee. Thursday came and went without ceremony. Frost's office was on the 14th floor of a downtown building with glass walls, and a view that, on a clear day, stretched far enough to make the world look organized. Frost herself was compact, precise, and possessed of the particular calm of a woman who had spent 20 years watching marriages fail from the inside out. She did not offer sympathy. She offered strategy, which was exactly what Jerome needed. He laid out Camille's preliminary analysis, the 43 transfers, the booking calendar gaps, the email correspondence confirming Grant's knowledge of the marriage. Frost reviewed it without rushing. When she set the last page down, she looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "This is a good start," she said. "We'll need the full 14-month financial record. Bank statements, business accounts, anything that shows the pattern of transfers alongside evidence of what services, if any, were actually rendered." She folded her hands. "If we can demonstrate systematic asset repositioning with intent to defraud the marital estate, that changes the entire shape of the settlement." Jerome asked what that would look like in court. She told him plainly. He listened. He asked 3 follow-up questions, each one precise, each one aimed at the mechanism, not the emotion. Frost noted this the way people noted things about Jerome, quietly, with a small recalibration of her expectations. "One more thing," she said, as he was putting his copies back in order. "Don't change your behavior at home. Don't move money. Don't make any sudden changes to your accounts. Give her nothing to react to." "I understand," Jerome said. He already knew. The 2 weeks that followed had a strange, suspended quality, like standing under a structure mid-inspection, knowing exactly where the damage was, saying nothing, still holding the clipboard. Jerome worked. He came home. He ate dinner across from Adrienne and asked about her day and listened to her answers and offered enough of his own to keep the rhythm of normal life moving forward. At night, he sat at the desk in the spare room with his copies of the financial documents, building the timeline the way he built everything, component by component, cross-referenced, stress-tested. He photographed every document before Frost's office scanned it. He made a second copy of everything Darius had sent and stored it off-site. He organized the wire transfer records by date, then by amount, then cross-referenced each one against Adrienne's business booking calendar. The gaps were not subtle. They were not close calls. They were open, empty columns, transfer dates with no vendor invoices, no venue contracts, no staffing logs, nothing at all on the other side of the ledger except the money going in and then quietly moving somewhere else. Adrienne, during all of this, relaxed. He could see it happening. The way a woman who expects punishment and doesn't receive it begins to reinterpret the silence. She stopped tensing when he came into rooms. She started touching his arm again when she passed him in the kitchen. She smiled at him over dinner with something that looked, if you weren't paying close attention, like genuine warmth. She also called Grant. Darius told him on a Wednesday. The call lasted 11 minutes. Jerome was in the spare room with his documents when the text came in. He read it. He set the phone face down on the desk. He went back to the timeline he was building and added a new entry at the bottom. Contact log, 11-minute time-stamped. He kept working. Sunday, his mother called at 2:30. "Jerome!" Patricia's voice had that particular evenness she used when she was being careful. "I was over earlier while you were out. I was putting the casserole dish back in the dining room and I noticed the china cabinet. Baby, it looks emptier than the last time I was here. Did you all move anything?" Jerome set down the pencil he was holding. He walked through the dining room first. She was right. The cabinet had gaps in it, clean, rectangular absences where the good china used to sit. He moved through the house slowly after that, methodically, the way he moved through a building after a reported failure, room by room, checking each system. The painting from the hallway was gone. The one he'd bought in 2019 from a small gallery in Savannah. A large format piece, oils on canvas, the kind of thing that takes up a whole wall and changes the quality of light in a room. Gone. Just a slightly lighter rectangle on the paint where it used to hang. His grandmother's china. The painting. He catalogued both and kept moving. He found the folder on the third pass through the bedroom. Or rather, he found the absence of the folder. The fireproof lockbox in the back of the closet, the one he'd told Adrian held old tax records, was unlocked and lighter than it should have been. He lifted the lid. The tax records were still there. His passport was there. His father's documents were not. He stood in the closet for a long moment. The folder had held everything. The original deed to a small parcel of land in rural Georgia that his father had purchased quietly over decades of careful saving. The title documents. The survey maps with his father's handwritten notes in the margins. The ink gone faint, but still legible. The letter his father had written to accompany the will. In the careful, deliberate handwriting of a man who chose his words the way he chose everything, with full awareness that they would have to last. Jerome closed the lockbox. He walked out of the bedroom, through the kitchen, and out the back door. He sat down on the back step for a moment in the afternoon light. Then he stood up, walked around the side of the house to his car, got in, and closed the door. He called his mother back. He told her about the china. He told her about the painting. He told her about the folder. When he said his father's documents, his voice cracked. Just once. A single, small fracture. The sound of something load-bearing giving way under weight it was never meant to carry alone. Then it steadied. His mother didn't say anything right away. She just stayed on the line with him, her breath slow and present on the other end. And that was enough. Jerome looked through the windshield at the back of his own house, the yard, the oak tree in the corner his father had helped him plant the first spring after they moved in. He didn't go back inside yet. He sat with it. He read every fracture. He catalogued every point of failure, the way he had always done, the way his training demanded, the way his father had taught him, without ever calling it that. He noted each one. He held them all. He called Frost's office when the sun was barely up. Her assistant picked up on the second ring. Jerome gave his name, said it was time-sensitive, and was told Frost had a gap at 8. He took it. Frost listened without interrupting. When he finished describing the missing items, the china, the painting, the folder, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Don't go near that storage unit alone. Don't call Adrian about it. Don't confront her. Not yet." "I know," Jerome said. "We document the recovery the same way we document everything else. Witnessed, Itemized, time-stamped. She paused. Do you have someone who can arrange a police presence? A courtesy call. Not an arrest, not a report. Just an officer present while you access the facility. Jerome said he did. Frost said, then do it today, before she realizes anything is missing. Darius made one call. He didn't explain everything. He rarely did. He had 40 years of city contract work behind him and 40 years of favors moving in both directions. By 10 that morning, he had confirmation. A patrol officer, off-duty but in good standing, would meet Jerome at the storage facility at noon as a private courtesy, not official business, just a witness with a badge. Jerome arrived 11 minutes early. The facility was a squat, industrial building off a 2-lane commercial road. Rows of identical orange doors under a corrugated metal roof. Security cameras mounted at the corners, a clipboard and pen check-in system that still ran on paper. Jerome checked in under the name registered to the unit, which was Adrienne's mother's, a detail that Darius had confirmed the night before through a county records search. The fact that Adrienne had registered it under someone else's name was its own kind of document. The officer arrived at noon exactly. Jerome showed him the paperwork, the marriage certificate establishing joint claim to marital property, the photos of the empty china cabinet, the photograph he had taken of the lighter rectangle on the hallway wall. The officer reviewed it, nodded, and said, "Lead the way." Unit 14C. Jerome lifted the door. The china was there, packed in 2 cardboard boxes with the lids folded shut, stacked against the left wall. The painting was leaning face-in against the far wall, wrapped in moving blankets and secured with packing tape. And beside it, in a brown accordion folder held shut with an elastic band, were his father's documents. Jerome crouched down and opened the accordion folder first. The deed was on top. 4 pages, legal weight paper, his father's signature on the last page in the same careful handwriting he had last seen in that closet. Below it, the survey maps, folded along old creases. Below those, the letter. He didn't read the letter. He already knew what it said. He just confirmed it was there, all of it, intact. Then closed the folder and stood up. He had brought his own inventory sheet. He and the officer went through every item together. The china, 12 place settings, 4 serving pieces. The painting, 1, confirmed. The accordion folder, 1, contents verified by Jerome against a pre-prepared list, signed by both Jerome and the officer, and dated at the time of recovery. He loaded everything into his car himself. Frost's paralegal was waiting at the office when he arrived. She photographed every item before Jerome took custody of anything officially. The unopened boxes, the wrapped painting, the accordion folder, and logged each one against the inventory sheet. The process took 40 minutes. Jerome signed 2 copies of everything and left 1 set with Frost's office. By 3 in the afternoon, he was at his bank. The account transfer was clean and fully within his legal rights. Assets that were clearly his premarital property or documented personal purchases moved into a separate personal account that Attorney Frost had already reviewed and cleared. He brought the documentation for each transfer. The bank manager, a careful man who had worked with Jerome for years, processed it without comment. Jerome drove home. Adrienne had made dinner. She had set the table. The everyday dishes, not the good china, which she did not know was now locked in Jerome's car. And she had cooked the lemon herb chicken that Jerome had always liked. She smiled when he came through the door. She asked how his day was. She had, he noticed, lit candles. Over dinner she brought up couples counseling again. She had found someone, she said. A therapist with good reviews. Someone a friend had recommended. She thought it could help them. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Jerome looked at her hand on his. He looked up at her face. "Send me the information," he said. "I'll take a look." She smiled, relieved, still managing. After dinner, he washed the dishes while she made a phone call in the other room. her voice low and warm, the performance of a woman whose life was stabilizing. He could hear her telling someone, probably her friend Keisha, that things were getting better. He dried the last dish and put it away. Later, in the spare room, Jerome unlocked his personal safe and placed the accordion folder inside. He looked at the deed for a moment. His father's signature. The ink faint, but there. He closed the safe. Then he sat down at his drafting table and pulled his blueprints toward him. He picked them up. Jerome called her on a Wednesday evening. He was standing in the kitchen when he did it. Calm, still. The way he always was before something structural. She picked up on the second ring. "I've been thinking," he said. "I think I'm ready to have a real conversation. About moving forward." A pause. Then, "Jerome." Her voice cracked just slightly. Controlled. "Yes, absolutely. Tell me when." "Saturday afternoon," he said. "Be home by 2. I'll be there." Another pause, softer now. "I'm really glad you called." He said goodnight and hung up. Saturday came the way winter mornings do. Quiet, gray, and settled. Darius arrived first, at 1:30. He wore a dark button-down and said nothing beyond what was necessary. He pulled out the chair nearest the window and sat down. He folded his hands on the table and looked straight ahead, the way a man looks when he has already done his grieving. Patricia arrived 10 minutes later. Jerome helped her with her coat. She touched his face briefly with one hand, just a press of her palm against his cheek, then walked to the dining room and sat down beside Darius without speaking. At 1:55, Jerome's phone rang. Attorney Frost, calling in from her office. He put her on speaker, placed the phone at the center of the table, and introduced her clearly to the room. "This call is being disclosed to all parties," Frost said. "I'm here in a professional capacity as counsel for Jerome Whitfield. I won't be directing this conversation. I'll speak when relevant." The front door opened at 2 o'clock. Adrienne walked in wearing a cream blouse and her good earrings. She had done her hair. She had prepared for a conversation between two people trying to repair something, and she stopped at the edge of the dining room like she had stepped off a curb she hadn't seen. Her eyes moved from Darius to Patricia, then to Jerome, then to the phone on the table, then back to Jerome. "Sit down, Adrienne," Jerome said. She sat. Jerome looked at her across the table. He kept his voice level and his hands still. "I want to give you a chance to say it yourself," he said. "All of it. When it started. What you moved. What you planned." He paused. "In front of my family. Tell me the truth, and I will listen to every word." Adrienne's jaw tightened, then released. Her eyes moved to Patricia, then back to Jerome. She straightened slightly. The performance was assembling itself piece by piece, right in front of him. "Jerome." Her voice was soft, earnest. "I already told you everything. It started 3 months ago. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. And there was nothing financial about any of it. I don't know what you think you—" Jerome opened the folder. He placed the first document on the table and slid it toward the center. 43 wire transfers, he said. 14 months. Routed through your event coordination business from Holloway Capital Group. He set the second document beside it. 6 of those transfers occurred during calendar windows, when your business had no active events booked under that company's name. Adrian looked at the papers and then back at his face. He placed the next document down. Storage Unit 14C, registered under your mother's name. He set the itemized inventory sheet on top, the one signed by both Jerome and the officer, time-stamped. My grandmother's china, the painting I purchased in 2019, and my father's documents. He let that sit for a moment. All of it recovered and in my possession. He set down Camille's financial analysis next. 2 pages, annotated in Camille's precise handwriting, each irregular transfer flagged and dated. My colleague reviewed this structure in an afternoon, he said. She documented it. The court will have this. Then the contact logs. Printed, time-stamped, each entry a record of a call or message between Adrian and Grant Holloway. 14 months, Jerome said again. Not 3. And last, the email correspondence, 3 pages, pulled from records Darius had obtained through a mutual contact. Jerome placed them on top of the pile and smoothed the edge flat. This one is from the 2nd month, he said. Grant uses my name. He knew I was your husband from the beginning. He looked up at her. This was never something that happened to you. It was something you built. Adrian's composure broke in pieces, the way old plaster does. First a crack, then a section falling, then another. She started to explain, the words coming fast. Context, she said. Mischaracterized, she said. And when Jerome didn't move or speak, she pivoted. She turned to Patricia with her eyes full and her voice dropping into something soft and reaching. Patricia, you know me. You know how much I... Patricia looked at her. Don't speak to me right now. 7 words, flat and final. No anger in them. Something worse than anger. A door closed. Adrian turned back to Jerome. He let the silence stand for a moment. Then, the divorce petition was filed this morning. The financial transfers have been flagged for fraud review as potentially fraudulent marital asset dissipation. He held her gaze. If you contest anything related to the Georgia land, I will pursue it as theft. My attorney will handle everything from this point forward. He closed the folder. The table was covered in paper. Every document visible, every transfer accounted for, every lie sitting in plain sight under the dining room light. Adrian sat surrounded by it all. She did not move. She did not speak. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something permanent has just been said out loud. Adrian retained an attorney within the week. His name was Martin Shelby. He had a corner office in Buckhead and a reputation for aggressive negotiation in high-asset divorces. Adrian sat across from him in a leather chair and slid Jerome's documentation across his desk. Shelby was quiet for a long time. He read the wire transfer records first, then Camille's analysis, then the contact logs. He set the email correspondence down last and pressed 2 fingers to his mouth, thinking. Walk me through the storage unit, he said. She did. He asked about the land document. She explained. He wrote something on his notepad and underlined it twice. When she finished, Shelby leaned back and looked at her the way doctors look at patients before they say something a patient doesn't want to hear. The financial record is comprehensive, he said. I mean that in the most specific way possible. Whoever assembled this knew what they were doing. The transfers, the analysis, the chain of custody on the recovered items. He paused. Adrian, if we try to challenge this documentation directly, we lose. The court isn't going to look at 43 flagged transfers and assigned storage unit inventory and find ambiguity. So what does that mean? She asked. It means your negotiating position is significantly weaker than it would have been, he said. The fraud review designation alone complicates any equitable settlement claim. The court is going to scrutinize every dollar that moved through your business over the past 14 months. He set his pen down. We manage what we can, but I won't stand in front of a judge with this paperwork and tell you we're going to win on the financials. Adrian sat very still. She had walked into that office expecting Shelby to find the crack in Jerome's case. There wasn't one. Attorney Frost filed the subpoena for Holloway Capital Group's business records on a Thursday morning, standard procedure in a divorce involving financial transfers between a third-party business and a marital asset. Grant's attorneys responded within 72 hours. They cooperated fully. That was the part Adrian didn't anticipate. Grant didn't fight the subpoena. He didn't stall. He produced documentation promptly and completely. And the documentation he produced was structured in a way that was careful and precise. It clarified every transfer. It drew clean lines around his company's exposure. It showed exactly what Adrienne's business had received, when, and under what characterization. He did not attend a single proceeding. He did not call Adrienne. He did not send a message through anyone. Not a word. Not a gesture. Nothing that could be read as solidarity or even acknowledgement. The man who had held her in a slow embrace on a warm Miami sidewalk and whispered something into her ear that made her laugh. That man had simply calculated his exposure and made his choices accordingly. Adrienne was a line item now, a liability he had already closed. The subpoena became part of the public court record. That was how it reached Marcus Webb, a business journalist based in Miami who had been tracking Holloway Capital Group since a short item ran in a regional finance newsletter 6 months prior about a state regulatory inquiry. Webb had been watching, waiting for something with more surface area. The divorce filing gave him what he needed to connect the dots. The story ran on a Tuesday in a Miami-based business publication. It was not a long piece. It was precise. It laid out the regulatory inquiry, the divorce filing, and the subpoena in plain, factual language. No accusations beyond what the public record already contained. It was the kind of story that doesn't make headlines. It makes phone calls. The first investor withdrawal letter arrived at Holloway Capital's offices 11 days after publication. The second came 4 days later. Both cited reputational concerns in language that was professionally vague and completely unambiguous. Grant's managing director read both letters at his standing desk and did not immediately forward them to Grant, which was itself a message. The development partnership was the one that cost the most. 18 months Grant had spent building toward it. A public-private initiative, affordable mixed-use development on a waterfront parcel that required city council approval. He had done everything right. He had cultivated the right council member, attended the right function, been photographed at the right events. The council member read Webb's story on a Wednesday morning. By Friday, he had quietly withdrawn his committee recommendation. He offered no public comment. He simply went silent in the way that powerful people go silent when they have decided someone is no longer worth the association. The partnership didn't collapse with a loud noise. It just stopped moving. Grant didn't call the council member. He knew better than to make that call. Over the following 2 months, 2 senior associates at Holloway Capital left for other firms. Neither gave a public reason. One sent a brief email to Grant thanking him for the opportunity. The other gave 2 weeks' notice in person and was professional about it, which was somehow worse. Grant was still in business. He still had clients and projects and a firm with his name on it. But the rooms he had occupied, the rooms where decisions were made and relationships formed, and the next 18 months were planned over dinner, those rooms had begun contracting, and the people in them had noticed his absence without saying anything about it. That was its own kind of erosion. Darius called Jerome on a Tuesday afternoon. Jerome was at his drafting table working through the load calculations on a residential foundation project. He had his headphones on one ear. He picked up. Darius told him about the investor withdrawals. He named the amounts, the dates, the language from the letters. He mentioned the development partnership going quiet. He kept it factual, the way he kept most things. Jerome listened without interrupting. When Darius finished, Jerome was quiet for a moment. He looked at the blueprints in front of him. "I didn't do that," he said. "He did that." He set the phone down on the desk. He picked up his pencil. He went back to his blueprints. Adrienne called on a Wednesday morning. Jerome was in his truck, parked outside a supply yard, reviewing delivery schedules on his phone when her name appeared on the screen. He looked at it for one full ring. Then he answered. "I'd like to meet," she said. "No attorneys, just us. I need to say some things to you." Jerome looked out the windshield at nothing in particular. A forklift moved slowly across the yard. A man in a yellow vest walked behind it with a clipboard. "All right," he said. She suggested a coffee shop in Decatur. Neutral, quiet, the kind of place that filled with laptops and soft background noise and no one who knew either of them. He said fine. They agreed on Friday at 2. He got there first. The shop was small and unhurried. Exposed brick, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu behind the counter. Jerome ordered a plain coffee and took a corner table near the window. Outside, the afternoon traffic moved in both directions without urgency. He sat with his hands around the cup and waited. Adrienne arrived 7 minutes late. He saw her before she saw him, pushing through the glass door, scanning the room, still dressed the way she had always dressed when she wanted to be taken seriously. But something was different. The tiredness in her face was not the kind you sleep off. It had set in the way a stain sets into wood, not sitting on the surface anymore, but worked all the way down into it. She spotted him, and something passed through her expression that was not quite relief and not quite dread. Something in between. She ordered at the counter. She brought her cup to the table and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The shop hummed around them. The low sound of music, someone typing, the hiss of the espresso machine. "Thank you for coming," she said. Jerome nodded once. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "The company's been ordered liquidated." She said it the way you say a thing you have already said to yourself so many times it has gone flat. "The civil penalty came through last week. I'm looking at an apartment off Glenwood." A pause. "It's fine. It'll be fine." Jerome said nothing. He let her have the space. She looked at the table. "He never called me. Grant." Her voice didn't break on it. She had already processed that part, or buried it deep enough that it couldn't surface here. "Not after the subpoena. Not once." She exhaled slowly. "I don't know what I expected." The espresso machine hissed again somewhere behind the counter. "I made choices," Adrienne said. Her voice was steady now, careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this and was trying to deliver it honestly anyway. "I made choices that She stopped, started again. "I am going to spend the rest of my life with what I did to you. I know that. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me." She looked up at him for the first time since she sat down. "I'm asking if there's any version of this where you can forgive me. Any version. I'll take whatever you can give." Jerome looked at her. He held the question the way he held everything, still turning it over, giving it the weight it deserved. He was not a cruel man. He had never been one. He felt the full truth of her words, and did not dismiss them. He set his cup down. "I don't wish you harm," he said. His voice was even, unhurried. "That's true. I mean that." He paused. "But I don't have anything left for you, Adrienne. I gave you everything I had, everything I built, everything I carried. I gave it to what I thought we were building together, and you used it to build a door out." He let that sit for a moment. "I can't forgive that right now. Maybe I won't ever. I don't know yet." He looked at her directly. "But I'm going to be fine." Adrienne's jaw tightened. Her eyes went bright for just a second. Not anger, something rawer than that. And then she pressed her lips together and looked back down at her cup. She nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone has told you the truth you already knew, and there is nothing left to argue with. Jerome sat with her in the quiet for one more moment. Then he stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He reached over and rested his hand flat on the table between them, not on hers, just near. A brief, still gesture. Then he lifted it. He walked to the door and pushed through it into the afternoon light. The air outside was warm and carried the smell of cut grass from somewhere down the block. He walked to his truck without stopping. His keys were already in his hand. He did not look back. Inside the coffee shop, Adrienne sat at the corner table with her hands around her cup. The background noise of the room continued around her, the music, the typing. the easy movement of people who had somewhere to be. She sat there, alone. 14 months later, Jerome drove a stretch of Georgia highway he had come to know by feel. Red clay shoulders on both sides, tall pines standing close to the road, blocking the last of the evening light until it broke through in long amber strips across the asphalt. He had the windows down. No music, just the rush of warm air and the sound of the tires on the road, and, from the back seat, the occasional shift of weight that meant the dog was repositioning himself again. "Settle down," Jerome said. The dog, a big dark brown mixed breed named Sable that he had not planned on getting and could not now imagine living without, huffed once and went still. Jerome drove. He had relocated 8 months ago, not running toward anything in particular, but not running from anything either. The move made sense the way good structural decisions make sense. Not dramatic, just correct. Closer to Patricia, closer to the land, closer to the work he had spent a decade deferring because the marriage always had something else waiting at the front of the line. The affordable housing project was his. 42 units in a neighborhood that had been promised investment for 30 years and received very little of it. His name was on the plans. His name was on the partnership agreement with Detrick Regional Development, a firm he had met through a referral from an old colleague, a firm that had spent 20 minutes in their first meeting trying to impress him, and the rest of the meeting listening to him talk. He liked them for that. The work was hard and slow and full of the kind of problems that required actual solutions rather than workarounds. He went to sleep thinking about it. He woke up still thinking about it. He had not felt this way about a project in years. He cooked on Sundays. Real cooking. Not the kind that was just assembling things, but the slow kind that made the whole house smell like something. He had dinner with Darius on the first Saturday of every month. Darius always brought beer he claimed was local, and that Jerome suspected was not. And they sat on Jerome's back porch and talked about the project, and about football, and about very little else. It was always enough. He visited Patricia every week without fail. She always had something on the stove. She always pretended she hadn't made it specifically for him. There was also a woman named Renata, a landscape architect he had met through the development firm, quiet and thoughtful and funny in a way that snuck up on you. They had dinner occasionally. There was warmth there. No urgency, no performance, just warmth at the edges, returning slowly the way warmth does when you don't rush it. He did not rush it. Adrian was in Atlanta. He knew that much, not because he followed it, but because Patricia heard things secondhand, and sometimes passed them along without editorializing. The company was gone. The apartment off Glenwood. Jerome heard it and felt, genuinely, very little. Not satisfaction, not grief, just the neutral acknowledgement of information about someone who no longer lived in the active part of his thinking. Grant Holloway was still in Miami, still operating under the Holloway Capital name, though the name carried less than it had. The development partnership had never recovered. 2 senior associates had left the firm in the year following the story's publication. Jerome had read the story once when it ran, confirmed it was accurate, and moved on. The rooms that used to open for Grant were slower to open now, and some of them had stopped altogether. Jerome had not caused that. Not directly. He had simply declined to protect Grant from the weight of his own decisions. In structural terms, that was load-bearing enough. Neither of them occupied space in Jerome's thinking anymore. There was too much in front of him that mattered. He turned off the highway onto a narrow 2-lane road he had learned to find in the dark, drove another quarter-mile, and pulled his truck off onto the red clay shoulder at the edge of his father's land parcel. He cut the engine. Sable lifted his head from the back seat. "Stay," Jerome said. He climbed out and walked toward the tree line, his boots pressing into the soft clay. The last of the light was coming in low through the pines, gold going orange, going almost red, the way it did at this hour in this part of the state. like the sky was doing something deliberate. The air smelled like pine sap, and the particular coolness that comes up from Georgia soil in the evening after a warm day. He stopped at the edge of the trees. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the deed. Folded once, the way it had always been folded. The creases worn soft from handling. He opened it carefully. His father's signature was there at the bottom of the page, faded. The ink gone pale with time, but fully legible. Every letter still present. Every letter exactly where it had always been. Jerome looked at it for a moment. Then he folded it again, along the same creases, and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at the land. The red clay. The tall pine going dark at the tops as the light dropped away. He stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. Then he turned back toward his truck. He already had plans. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.